Introduction. As a child, I was always fascinated by the concept of superheroes. The ongoing battle of good versus evil, superpowers, amazing gadgets, different personas, and secret identities. This concept transcended with me into adulthood and helped me mould my own persona as a soldier. As a soldier, my uniform was my armour, and whilst in uniform, I would act and feel differently than how I would without it. This was evident in the late summer of 2003, when I was driving through London towards Wellington Barracks. It was the early hours of the morning when I witnessed a brawl across the street. Suddenly, I felt a tightness across my chest and began to become nauseous. I was having trouble focusing my vision whilst driving my car, but was too afraid to stop. For the first time in my adult life, I was feeling genuine fear. This fear was overwhelming. I was having a panic attack. I was 24 years old, a section commander in the British Army, an infantryman who had completed 3 operational tours of duty, and a few months earlier, I was leading my men to war in Iraq. Now, I felt naked and vulnerable without them. I was afraid. Where was my uniform? Where was my armour? It would be over a decade later until I experienced these horrendously painful feelings again. And it was no coincidence that it happened at the same time as ISIS was invading parts of Iraq. However, along with the anxiety and panic attacks, I was now also experiencing bad dreams, nightmares and flashbacks. I would experience heat and smells from blasts and would wake up disorientated and confused. It was June 2015. I was still a serving soldier, but at this point, not for much longer. I was due to be medically discharged in the August, as the result of a spinal injury sustained in Afghanistan several years earlier. I was fortunate to be self-aware of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, in myself, and immediately sought help from the very institution that was accountable for them to begin with. However, I was left woefully and bitterly disappointed with the treatment that I would initially receive. I had previously been trained and appointed as a unit welfare officer, and had witnessed how the early untreated symptoms of PTSD could quickly manifest out of control. I was very conscious of this, and I was determined for the sake of my family that this would not happen to me. Regrettably, I was mistaken. By the time I saw a military therapist, I had less than 6 weeks left of my 20 years service to complete. I was transitioning to civilian life at a personal recovery unit, having recently undergone spinal surgery for the 3rd time in 3 years. Despite this, I got the impression that there was no long-term plan, let alone any continuity with future mental health providers to treat my deteriorating mental health, or spinal injury for that matter. After 2 brief sessions with a therapist, I was informed that I was managing extremely well, and that my training and experience as a former welfare officer would sustain me in the future. Regrettably, this was not the case, as, like most soldiers suffering with battlefield trauma, it takes a tremendous amount of courage to initially seek help. Additionally, to be told that I had the tools to manage my mental health myself would only further exacerbate my underlying trauma. In hindsight, the army simply wanted me off their books. I was someone else's problem now. For the following 2 years, I felt like a pressure cooker that could blow at any moment and was fearful, as I didn't know what the trigger may be. I kept comforting myself, telling myself that I was in control, as I couldn't understand why I was so angry all the time. Eventually, on the 22nd of May 2017, I eventually blew. The trigger was the terror attack on the Ariana Grande concert at the Manchester Arena, where 800 people were injured, and 22 people, including children, died. I automatically felt responsible for this unspeakable act of terror on 7 irrational subconscious levels. But why? 3 months prior, I had taken my daughter to watch the Marvel live show at this very arena, and had spoken to my wife afterwards about how concerned I was about the exiting policy of the spectators from the venue. I had explained to her that the way the spectators exited from the show towards the heavily confined exits established the perfect conditions for a terrorist attack. At the time, I thought that I was being paranoid, as I almost had a panic attack myself while exiting the Manchester Arena. I secretly knew that I was still suffering with my own mental health, but was too ashamed to admit it. After the attack, I didn't sleep for 3 days, and I blamed myself for not doing something to prevent it. My subconscious was screaming, "This attack was your fault, you were to blame." Later, to further vindicate personal blame, I would also irrationally conclude that I was solely responsible for this atrocity, as a consequence of my actions and decisions throughout the 2003 war in Iraq. I was suppressing guilt and trauma that had manifested into irrational thoughts to the point of almost self-loathing that was significantly linked to my military service. I understand now that I was subconsciously punishing myself as a result of the trauma of warfare, not just from the 2003 war in Iraq, but also from the liberation of Kosovo in 1999 and the genocide I witnessed firsthand. Only after seeking help was I then able to understand why I was feeling this way. As an infantry soldier, I had been hardened to ignore pain and to suppress my emotions through behavioural training and conditioning, and this alone has long-term harmful effects. There are days when I still have trouble managing my PTSD, as part of the guilt that has haunted me for over 20 years still remains. Soldiers have a strict code of military values and standards instilled into them and, as such, justify the horrors of war and their experiences through a righteous, warranted lens. But once that lens is removed, how does one morally justify such actions? How does a veteran live with themselves if they are not just? This is the story of that lost generation. A generation that feels abandoned by society, rejected, along with our triumphs, struggles, and ongoing psychological battles within ourselves. This is a personal account of how the modern soldier lives with warfare and the hidden scars that they, unfortunately, must carry with them every day.